Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. When you think of the middle class, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Well, according to a poll conducted by the Washington Post, most people think of 6 indicators as defining the middle class. Having a stable job, being able to save for the future, being able to afford a $1,000 emergency without taking on debt, being able to pay your bills on time without worry, having health insurance, and being able to retire comfortably. And each of these 6 items are very reasonable. None of them are lavish requests. Being able to set aside some money for your future is essential if you ever hope to step away from the workforce and not be dependent on a paycheck. And it's generally recommended that you save anywhere from 15 to 20% of your income in order to do that successfully. And being able to afford an emergency without having to go into debt, that's essential too. But this is not a luxury that all Americans have. Being able to pay your bills on time goes a long way to reducing financial stress. And health insurance, that's a basic necessity. But in America, it's a very expensive necessity. And being able to retire comfortably, well, that circles back to actually being able to set aside money for your future, having room within your budget to save. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median income for a 4-person family with 2 working adults is roughly $115,000. For the longest time, it felt like a 6-figure income came with a certain level of prestige. Like at the very least, it granted you access to a middle-class lifestyle. But today, as costs have increased, even at this income level, a middle-class lifestyle is out of reach for many. There are 2 really useful resources that I like when it comes to gauging expenses in various areas. One is the Family Budget Calculator from the Economic Policy Institute, and the other is the Living Wage Calculator from MIT. Both are incredibly useful calculators that I will link down below if you're interested in checking them out. And the cool thing about them is that you can kind of make them specific to your area. You can select your state and your metro region and get more detailed information based on where you live. And with each of these calculators, if you're looking at a 4-person household with 2 working adults and 2 children, both of these calculators estimate that you would need an income of over $100,000 to, as the EPI states, attain a modest yet adequate standard of living. With the EPI calculator, the region I selected was Providence, Rhode Island metro area. They estimate that you would need an annual income of about $106,000. Using the MIT calculator, they estimated a figure actually closer to $125,000 a year pre-tax. And look at the line items in these pre-planned budgets. You have housing, food, childcare, transportation, healthcare, and taxes as the biggies. These are not frivolous and miscellaneous expenses. These are essential expenses. In the EPI calculator, they do factor in about $11,000 for other necessity. In the MIT calculator, we do have fairly substantial line items built in for civic and other, totaling nearly $19,000 over the course of the year. So that can create some breathing room for potentially some fun and enjoying life, which realistically should be in everyone's budget. But by and large, these numbers are not unreasonable. And if you look at each of these budgets, the largest single line item in both of them is childcare. And childcare is no joke. Ask someone who pays for childcare. It's essentially the equivalent of another mortgage payment, which is often why we hear about so many parents stepping away from the workforce, especially when their children are young, because quite frankly, the burden of childcare costs, especially with multiple children, can become too steep. Now let's be very clear, there's nothing wrong with taking time away from the workforce to be a stay-at-home parent. There's great value in that, but there's a big difference between being forced into that position due to economic necessity within a family and having the choice in that position. Fortunately, for most, much of the childcare costs are isolated to the first handful of years of a child's life, and then greatly taper off once the child becomes school age. So for many, this budget line item might only exist for a handful of years, and it could be very realistic to say that during that time period, you might have to live on a more strict budget. The other biggest line items in these budgets are housing and transportation. Housing can be a rather inflexible one, especially at this time, where we're in an environment where interest rates are the highest they've been in decades, coupled at the same time where housing costs are the highest they've been in decades, and both of these factors combine to make housing a heavy burden. In fact, nearly 82% of homeowners feel locked in by their existing low-rate mortgage, according to data from Realtor.com. Looking at the impact of interest rates over time, if you were to buy a $350,000 home with a 20% down payment at an interest rate of 6.8%, your monthly payment would be nearly $2,100. However, that same mortgage at a 3% interest rate would give you a monthly payment of nearly $1,500. So even for those who wish to move, they may feel like there's an inability to do so because they feel locked into their current mortgage payment. They feel like there isn't room within their budget to take on a new, higher monthly payment, especially since budgets might already be running tight. And in this situation, we're looking at homes of equal value. If you're looking to upgrade your home, a more expensive home is going to come with a higher monthly payment. And the general rule of thumb is that you want to keep your housing costs to roughly 25% of your income. And with a $100,000 income, that would be about $25,000 a year. But being that this number is supposed to include any housing-related costs as well, think taxes, utilities, HOAs, things like that, this puts a $350,000 home out of reach for a household earning $100,000 at current interest rates. Now, you could make it more affordable by saving up with a heftier down payment, but again, that assumes that you have room within your current budget to set aside more in savings. Transportation, on the other hand, is an area you can influence. And again, this is a line item that's fairly significant. In today's environment, it's not uncommon to see car payments that are $500 or $700 a month. And the most common length for a new auto loan these days is 72 months or 6 years. Transportation costs can easily add up when you have 1 or 2 vehicles. You throw in a monthly payment, you consider the fuel source, whether that is gas or electric, maintenance, insurance. These can seem like very realistic figures. The best way to reduce this line item is quite simply 1, buy a more affordable car, and 2, keep it for longer. There's a reason they call cars the wealth killer, because if you're constantly upgrading your car to a newer and higher payment vehicle, it can really hurt your ability to make any financial headway. The general guideline for buying a car is 20, 4, and 10. That is to have a 20% down payment, take a payment for no more than 4 years, and that payment should be no more than 10% of your income. Now, if you can buy your car outright without an auto loan, that's even better. Or if you can find a way to budget in a 3-year term loan, that's amazing. I always feel like the less debt burden you can carry, the better. But you might notice one glaringly obvious essential that is missing from both of these budgets, and that is savings. Neither of these budgets seem to account for setting aside anything for short-term savings or long-term investments. And if we were to follow the traditional financial advice, something like a 50-30-20 budget, where 50% of your income goes towards essentials, 30% towards wants, and then we would say we would want our family to save 20% of their income. In that case, our family of 4 with a $100,000 income would want to be saving $20,000 a year. And if you break that savings category down further, you might say that 15% should go towards long-term investments and 5% towards short-term savings goals. But when you look at the budget laid out like this, it's not easy to find an additional $20,000. There just might not be that much breathing room to take from the other categories or trim them down to find this kind of excess. If we accept these line items as true and reasonable expenses, it might suggest that a more appropriate income for a family of 4 in a metro area might look something like $150,000, as it would allow for a saving and investment line item in the budget, both of which are essential. We all have short-term goals that we should be saving up for, some of which might be fun, because yes, fun in life is essential, or maybe they're necessary. Maybe that's a new car or a home or a hot water heater. Or we all have long-term goals that we should be saving up for, including retirement, where you eventually step away from the workforce. I do think it's worth mentioning that while yes, we often hear that the target savings rate on your income is about 15 to 20%, even if you can't hit this benchmark, it's still worth saving something. For instance, if you can save 5% of your income, that's great. Saving something is better than saving nothing. Also, keep in mind that a budget is always in flux and subject to change. If you are part of a group that is a family of 4 living in a metro area, currently footing the bill for childcare, realistically, you may just be in a time of life where your expenses are a bit higher. I've jokingly heard parents say that one of the biggest pay increases they ever got in their working career was when their kids no longer needed daycare. And yes, it comes across as a joke, but it's incredibly true. My son is currently in daycare, and daycare runs about $24,000 a year. It will feel incredible to have that back in my budget. Yes, when he's done with daycare, there will be other activities that I'm sure come with an expense, but they're not going to add up to that amount. If you're at this phase of life, your savings rate may take a hit for a few years, and it's not the end of the world. There are times in life where our expenses demand more of our dollars, but if you're following a budget, there should also be times in life where you can save more aggressively. Life is not linear, life is not perfect. Also worth keeping in mind that all of these figures are based off a family of 4, 2 working adults and 2 children in a metro area. These numbers change drastically if you consider, say, a family of 2 working adults and no children, or a family with more than 2 children, or a family in a non-metro area. The cool thing about these calculators, the EPI Family Budget Calculator and the MIT Living Wage Calculator, is that they allow you to play with these different family sizes than the different metro areas. For instance, the EPI calculator and the MIT calculator both say that a household of 2 working adults with no children would need an income closer to $60,000 in order to afford a modest yet adequate standard of living. So household dynamics are a factor in all of this. Yes, a middle-class lifestyle may be well within reach on an income of $60,000, or you may need an income of north of $150,000. There's a lot of factors at play. It isn't just income, it's location and family size and what that income allows you to afford. What do you think is the income necessary to afford a solid middle-class lifestyle? Leave your answer in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Hey, to pay, they're freaking